Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab. Welcome to How to Reassess Your Chess, Full Read, episode 11. In this video, we are going to go through part 3, Rooks, Files, Ranks, and Targets. So we're going to go into a deep dive on the way of functioning of the rooks and how to exploit open files, open ranks, and how to create targets. So let's start. Creating an open file 1. Okay. Let's start out with a simple but powerful statement. If you want your rook or rooks to be effective, they need an open file. This seems obvious, but the trick is to demand your rooks get an open file. Yet many players merely hope that one will magically materialize and, when it doesn't, wonder why things didn't go their way. So I just wanna tell you my 2 cents here. I've noticed that Silman, but also Zinzi Hasvili, because I'm watching some Zinzi Hasvili videos about random topics as entertainment when I go to sleep. And basically they both talk about this idea of insisting on things. Very interesting. Without an open file, a bishop or knight might easily outperform the rook. This is very, very interesting. I'm gonna read it again. Without an open file, a bishop or knight might easily outperform the rook, leaving it sitting passively behind its pawns, while it sadly dreams of unrealized potential. Yes, this is basic, but it's also extremely important and is often neglected by beginners and even tournament players in the E under 1200, D 1200 to 1399, C 1400 to 1599, and B 16 to 1799 levels. In fact, the battle to energize your rooks starts right in the opening. For example, a glance at this poor opening sequence by white will immediately send a message to a trained eye. So D4, D5, E3, Knight F6, Knight to C3. The message is that white most likely isn't even thinking about the future of his rooks. This is crazy. In fact, when I teach someone that plays in this type of fashion, I ask him, what about your rooks? Usually the answer I get is something like, well, I'm just trying to develop my pieces. I'll deal with the rooks later. Of course, invariably, I find that this kind of player experiences serious problems activating his rooks, and later often never comes. Returning to that rather innocuous opening sequence, E3 was early. Why block your own dark square bishop for no good reason? We will find that instead of knight c3, which blocks the c-pawn and leaves the knight on a square where it won't find much of a life, far better is c4. So you can imagine the knight back, you play c4, and only then knight c3. The difference is felt by white's whole army. Suddenly the knight on c3, combined with the pawn on c4, isn't alone in its battle against d5. And once the rook moves to c1, a later c takes d5 will allow it to exert influence down the c file. Clearly, pawn tension and pawn breaks are the tools that create open or half-open files, and their use goes from the very basic, just seen in the current position, to the moderately basic, next position, to solid tournament level, here, to the downright advance, here. Okay, I'm not going to click on those, we're going to see them time by time. Very interesting. So, creating an open file part 2. So let's look at the position, let's evaluate very quickly. Material, it's equal. Pawn structure symmetrical. There are no major weaknesses. There is f4 as a pawn break. We may have f5. We may have d5, but probably f5, I don't know. And let's compare the minor pieces very quickly. The knight on c6 stands well, I will say. The knight on c3, the same. The bishop on c4 is decently active and useful, pressuring f7. Our bishop on c8 is also active. because he's looking at the diagonal even though he's still in the starting square. Our bishop on e7 is not the greatest piece ever seen, so there's that. The knight on f6 is kind of limited, but is not horrible. Can go to h5, f4 perhaps in the future. The rooks are kind of the same. Their dark square bishop is like our light square bishop. So I will say perhaps their pieces are slightly better. Their dark square bishop is definitely better. So white perhaps is slightly better position. But their knight on e2, sorry, I didn't mention that. Their knight on e2 is perhaps... no, but it's fine. It's fine. Can go to g3 and f4 is supporting f4 is supporting e4. Yeah, probably white pieces are slightly better. Okay, let's read now. In this position, black's rooks don't have many options as far as open files go. However, white's rooks see happy times ahead by f2, f4, now or later, gaining kingside space and suddenly making the f1 rook a participant in the upcoming battle, or by b2, b4, now or later, fighting for a queenside initiative and striving to get the a1 rook into the thick of things on that wing. Okay, so that's very nice. Again, I have a blind spot for rooks and open files. I don't know why. And it's funny because the rook is my favorite piece. Yeah, the rook is my favorite piece, believe it or not. So this is Jeremy Silverman against Shane, San Francisco 1977. So this is a classic, the classic fossil. Okay, e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, so open Sicilian, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, g6. I think this is the dragon, I think. Bishop e3, because I have a repertoire on the accelerated dragon, but I think this is the dragon. Bishop e3, bishop g7, h3, preventing knight to g4, knight to c6, bishop to c4, developing the pieces, castle, bishop back to b3. This is prophylaxis against knight a5 perhaps, but I don't know, and even e6, d5. Bishop d7, castle. You can go for queen d2, long castle, crazy positions, but okay, castle was chosen in this game. Queen c8, eyeing h3, f4, gaining some space in the center, rook to d8, trying to improve the position of the rook. Queen f3, doing the same with the queen and connecting the rooks. Knight takes, bishop takes, bishop c6, staring down the e4 pawn, pinning it to the queen. Rook a to d1, putting the rook on a semi-open file. b5. Time to give white's rooks some love. Knight to d5, centralizing the knight. This move, which threatens to win by knight takes e7 check, so okay, here there is a threat, knight takes e7 will win the queen with a fork, and also the double black spawns, and also two double black spawns by knight takes f6, okay, forces black to capture on d5. However, its real purpose is to create a half-open file for white's rooks. Now this is very instructive because in a position like this you may not know how to continue, and of course you may look at knight d5, but you may see, knight takes, pawn takes, for example, the bishop goes back, or even bishop takes d4 with check first, rook takes, the bishop goes back, and you may not be quite sure why you did that. But again, if you keep in mind these concepts of the open files and stuff, you will realize that this pawn here is then weak, and you can use this open e5 for your rooks. And these two pieces will become very, very strong. And if you compare, if you look at this idea, right? Knight here, pawn here, bishop takes, bishop back, rook to e4, a6, let's say rook to e1. If you compare that position and you compare the two rooks and their two rooks, you are clearly much better when it comes to the comparison of pieces. So what I'm saying is, keeping in mind all of your pieces and all the possibilities, help you justify in your head certain moves and just have a plan. Again, what I've done here is a plan, right? I'm looking at the imbalances because after this variation that I mentioned, the idea of doubling up the rooks and having those rooks better than their rooks, that's an imbalance, better pieces, in relative strength. But that's also a plan, right? To create an open fight for your rooks. So This is very, very interesting and very important. Those are the things that really make you go to the next level. So b5, knight d5 again, knight takes. And here there is a comment by Grandmaster Maurice Ashley. Black has to accept the opening of the e-file, but the correct move was bishop takes d5. Wow, that's wow. Though giving the bishop is counterintuitive, it is justified by the fact that the c2 pawn, which is this guy here, is hanging. So white has to recapture on d5 with a pawn, e takes d5. Again, if you take with the bishop, queen takes c2 is available all of a sudden. Now the b3 bishop is not that great, and black gets counterplay after a5, which threatens a4 to trap the bishop, c3, a4 bishop c2, b4. You cannot capture because this bishop will fall. Or alternatively, after a5, a4, there is rook b8. And in general, black gets counterplay over to the queen side. And look at this, getting the rook into place, so activating those guys. But knight takes d5 was played, which again is super intuitive, but after e takes d5, bishop d7, they also have a bishop that is not perhaps, Rook f2 e1, immediately targeting this pawn, and look at the rook, has improved. Now we can see the point of white knight d5. The former e4 pawn has moved off the e-file onto d5, where it gains space and frees up that file for its rooks. This allows them to exert tremendous pressure against the e7 pawn. Now there is another comment by Grandmaster Maurice Ashley. The most accurate continuation was bishop takes, king takes, and f5. Wow. Consistent with the idea of opening files. On bishop takes f5 there is g4, brings pain on f7 because the bishop doesn't have e6 to defend f7, so you would have to go to d7, but then you get crushed. And instead on g takes f5, rook f2 e1 only now that white forced the weakness, and on rook e8 queen to f4, and a rook lift will come and black is in trouble. Okay, thank you, Maurice. So rook f2 e1, immediately attacking the pawn. But I want to mention something. Again, f5 is bishop takes, king takes, and f5 is the best sequence that correctly Grandmaster Ashley explains. However, I think that this is double instructive. So I'm really happy that these comments by Maurice Ashley are there. But at the same time, it's like, this is an international master playing in 1977. There are no computers, there's no engine, there's no evaluation and stuff. And a move like rook f2 e1, despite not being the most clinical, still puts this other guy, which I'm sure is also a strong player, in very great difficulties, right? So, in this modern engine era, and this is something that I talk about because I am victim of this, I definitely tend to think that, you always have only one move. But this makes chess so much less enjoyable. I think these lines show you that in human terms, like in a real game between two real people, there are many ways to go. Again, here you can just play rook f2 e1, that put the rook on the semi-open file. You can also take the bishop and play f5, right? So I really like this. So rook to e8 was played by Shane, which again, it's so natural. But it says black missed a chance here. Again, a5 instead of rook to e8 would have offered black counterplay. For example, c3 to save the bishop, a4, bishop c2, bishop f5. This is the engine speaking. So again, these are like engine lines, right? Because again, it seems like you're losing a pawn. Bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes e7. So you have to see this whole sequence and then find a3. The point. You're threatening a takes b2 and then to win on a2. So b3, rook e8, fighting for the open files. And if rook takes c8, rook takes c8, I guess you take the open file, so that's good. On rook d to e1, bishop takes. So you have to see everything. C takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook c8. and this line here, right? Give black tremendous counterplay. So crazy. Chess is so infinite, really, from our limited human perspective to the very least. So that's very instructive. But okay, in the game, you jumped in, they take, you restrict this bishop, you attack the pawn, they defend. This is human play, these are two masters playing. C3, to make sure there are no weird things going on. And now H5, a move based on fear. Black was worried about G2, G4, and makes a move to prevent that advance, and also to make F5 accessible to Black's bishop. However, the cure is worse than the disease, since now Black's kingside is seriously weakened, as shown by the rest of the game. Rook to E3 starts to pile up against E7, but perhaps also is ready to this allows rook lifts if the queen moves. Bishop F5, calmly following his plan. The alternative, bishop takes, rook takes, bishop F5 now, allows white to make use of the same strong bishop maneuver that's seen in the game. So we are about to see it. So bishop F5, here there is bishop takes, king takes, rook d to E1. Moves don't get more obvious or natural than this. Doubling on the E file will force two black pieces to play babysitter to the E7 pawn. Note how powerful white's double rooks are in comparison to their passive black counterparts on A8 and E8. Exactly. Compare these two rooks, very active attacking, compare these two rooks. Passive, defending, doing nothing. Queen D7. Black thinks he has everything under control. But white next move shows that he's badly mistaken. Boom, bishop d1. Suddenly black's bishop is about to be surrounded by g2, g4. So the idea is, okay, now g4 is available. Okay. Queen c7 was played, stopping g2, g4. How? Stopping g2, g4 by h4, okay, runs into queen to f2. When the h4 pawn becomes black's latest target of assassination unit. Okay, so if you go here, this falls. If you push here, I just take. Okay. But instead of these moves, there was also a5, g4, h takes, bishop b1, and now f5. Gives white a strong attack. For example, let's look first at bishop takes a2. Now there is rook takes e7. Very nice. And here there is a fork, and it's GG. So after instead g takes, queen f4, which threatens, I guess, queen g5 and stuff. f6 prevents that. g5 to really blast open everything. Bishop e4 tries to close. G takes check, e takes. On king takes, there is a pin on the pawn, so rook takes will win a piece. So e takes, and now rook g3 check, and black can resign. Yeah, there's also bishop to h5 coming. If the king goes here, there is queen h4, is GG. Yeah. So, queen c7 was played. The rest of the game was pretty straightforward. Here you just go g4, takes, bishop c8, f5, f6, king to g2 to allow some pieces to go to the e file, bishop b7, g5 to really blast it open, queen c4 which attacks d5, threatening bishop takes d5, bishop b3. Now if bishop takes d5, queen takes d5, and queen takes d5, bishop takes d5, wins a piece. So queen h4, but now rook e4. If you play queen takes g5, I guess there is rook g4, which is annoying, and on queen to d2 there is rook d2, and you're crushed. So queen h8, but now rook takes e7. Now if you take with the rook, you lose a bishop. So they play king f8, and now if rook takes b7, there is rook takes e1. Queen e4, which threatens rook takes e8. Rook takes e7, but now check. King g8, and here queen e6 leads to checkmate. However, I was so happy to snap off his bishop that I didn't bother looking for anything else. Okay, takes. Rook tries to save herself. Now rook to h1 attacks the queen. Queen g7 forces the trade the queens. And now g takes f6 check. And black resigned because, the piece. Rule: a half-open file is often used to exert tremendous pressure against weak enemy pawns. In this case, weak alludes to pawns that can't be protected by other pawns. Interesting. So this was a very instructive game. Now we are looking at another very instructive game. Parimarian Neji against Alexander Beliavsky, played in Amsterdam 2007. We are talking about two super strong players. So this is Rui Lopez, or Spanish. We keep going, relatively fast. We don't really need to understand exactly what's going on here. We just want to reach the pinnacle point. There is an attack against b5, but c3 is defended, so they have to defend that square. Queen to d3, attacks b5 again. Knight to c4, interposes. Knight f5. Just an outpost. Knight b6 back. Knight e to f3. Knight takes, again attacking b5. Queen a5, defense. Rook e2 defense, while also perhaps preparing rook e to b2. Rook b4. The queen cannot capture any2 because the rook takes back and it's just a queen for a rook. So queen a6, rook b2, here we go. g6, queen to f3, queen to c6. White is obviously better. So let's count material, 3, 3, 3, 3. So material is equal, there is a knight against the bishop. The bishop is basically a tall pawn, whereas the knight is amazing. The rooks are targeting b5, but the black rooks are also targeting c3 and a2. So yeah, white's better, but perhaps it's not so elementary how to continue, but let's see. White is obviously better. His huge knight, compare it to black's horrible bishop, and pressure against b5 gives him all the chances. He could play the position slowly and torture his opponent, but instead he realized that black's king doesn't have many defenders, and that his own queen and knight were putting some heat in that direction. A real attack might easily appear if his rooks were on an open file, and could penetrate into the enemy position. Therefore, why not bust open the b file? And so here, boom. Look at that, a4. Forcibly smashing the file open. Similar and also strong was c4. And here, rook to a5, which defends the pawn, because c4 also attacks the pawn. If you take, rook b7 wins on the spot. There's no way to defend this guy unless you sacrifice material. And instead, after rook a5, there is a4 again. White insists, look at how he highlights this word, that the b file is cleared. Rook takes. If you play rook takes c4, rook takes b5, rook takes b5, pawn takes, queen b7, b6. So this is another way to gain an advantage, and the monster pass pawn easily ices the game. After rook takes a4 though, there is rook takes a4, here rook to a8, queen to a6, standing behind the pass pawn, rook to d6, rook takes d5. Not sure I understand this move, but okay. There must be some tactical tricks here, but I don't see nothing here. So rook takes, pawn takes. Perhaps the idea was queen f6 with knight e7 as a threat. And then rook takes and it's over. So rook takes, pawn takes, queen b7, queen to g4. And the threat of queen c8 makes the win easy. Okay, so a4, and now rook takes a4 was played. Again, on rook a5, c4 transposes to the previous note, so rook takes a4, rook takes, b takes, rook b8. The rook has burst into black's position, and now the combined might of white's queen, rook and knight, which are all aiming at black's king, promise him a winning attack. His first threat is knight e7 check, picking up black's queen. Ah, okay. Now there is this threat, of course. So queen a6 saves from that. And now queen f6. Wait, what? He blundered. A real shame. White could have forced a win by knight e7 check, king to g7, knight takes g6. Wow. Wow. If you take with a king, rook takes. And if you take with a pawn, queen takes. So now queen a7 tries to attack. On rook c8, knight takes c5, which attacks f7. D takes, queen g4 check picks up the rook. That's crazy. And on queen a7, which attacks the rook, there is rook takes. And what happens if you take the knight? If you take the knight with the pawn, there is queen f6, but what if you take it with the king? I guess there is rook g8. No, there is... I'm not sure. I guess there is queen g4, perhaps. King f6. I don't know, but okay. A3, this attempt. Rook e8. A2, knight f8. That's crazy. These are some crazy lines. These are some crazy, crazy, crazy lines. These are some crazy lines. But okay, queen f6, rook c8. Suddenly the attack is over and the a pawn reigns supreme. Knight c7, rook b8, knight takes, rook b1, a3. Without the help of other pieces, white's queen is misplaced on f6. Chess is a team game, and here there's no team to help her out. That's crazy. That's actually insane. Wow. And he ended up losing. That's just... That's crazy, bro. That's crazy. But okay. This also shows that it's chess, you know, even the grandmasters sometimes they lose. Stealing an open file. Okay, let's keep going with our concept of open files, rooks and stuff. So, as we have seen, a file is a very vulnerable. Okay. As we have seen, a file is a very valuable commodity because it's the road that your rook and or queen travels on in order to penetrate into the enemy position. That's why such files are fiercely fought over, with both sides trying hard to make it their own. The most common way of wresting a file from the opponent is to pressure the enemy rook and give it a simple but painful choice. Trade on the file and give it up, or move the rook away from the file, which also gives it up. Black is in serious trouble, because his knight will prove to be much worse than white's bishop. Okay, let's look at this position. 3-4, 3-4, symmetrical pawn structure. We have equal space, I would say, here on the king side, slightly less space even on the queen side. We have a bishop against the knight. The knight is kind of stranded and is not clear to see a future for it. The rooks are, you know, contending on an open file. So I would say that it's important to fight for this open file. So let's see. Black is in serious trouble because his knight will prove to be much worse than white's bishop. The dark square around his king are weak and easily probed by the bishop, and white will manage to take over the d file and use it to penetrate into the enemy position. So, bishop g5. Announcing that he wants the d file, and that the opposing rook on d8 must either give it up by taking on d1, make a feeble attempt to remain on the d file, but rook d7 or rook d6, or run away and bow to white's will. rook to d6. The other moves were no better. For example, rook takes, knight c6, there is rook to d2, avoiding rook d5, knight e7, which is not good. Rook d2, rook to e8, queen to d1, doubling on the d file and laying permanent claim to it. Queen to c8, because on knight b8 there is rook to d6, that knight b8 to prevent knight d7, of course. So queen c8, rook to d7, and white domination is obvious. Now the other option was rook to e8, but now rook to d5, knight b7, rook a to d1, offers more file domination. Rook to f8, there is queen to b5, which threatens rook d7. Bishop f6 also is good, but queen b5, knight to c6, on a6, queen d7, another way to win the control of the file, so knight c6, bishop f6, rook a to a8, on a6, queen to d3, and again, if you play rook d8, I just take it, followed by rook d2 and rook a to d1, and after rook a to e8, rook to d5, rook to e6, bishop h4, with the usual huge advantage. Okay, a bunch of lines, not sure how much I like all these lines, but after rook d6, rook takes, queen takes, rook takes, queen to e6, and now rook to d5. Knight b7, queen to d2. Notice the nice coordination with both the rook and the bishop, and also the rook first, the queen second. Like in a real game here I would have played queen d2, but again, why not spend a tempo to improve that? Knight b7, queen to d2, c4, trying to generate some counterplay. If you take, then rook c8, I guess, and it's tough to defend those pawns forever. And also, now black wants the c5 square for the knight, so b4 prevents that. a5, rook to d7 attacks the knight, and also threatens rook e7, perhaps. And now a takes b4. Going for broke, since rook b8, a3, will leave black bound, helpless, and dead in the water. So a takes b4, rook takes b7, b3, going for this desperate attempt, and now bishop to h6. Genius move. And the extra piece and bank rank tricks combine to assure white's victory. This is a very nice move. Queen c6, because on b takes a2 there is the beautiful queen takes a2, and if you take here there's mate. That's why bishop h6 was played. So queen c6, rook a7, another beautiful, fantastic move. If rook takes queen to d8, queen e8, queen takes e8 is mate. So rook c8, and now rook to d7. If b takes a2, there is rook d8 mate. Well, it's not mate, but you have to play queen e8, and then rook takes, queen takes, pawn. So queen f6, defense. Now a takes, c takes, h3, and you can't play b2, and white's just up a piece. Showing black's helplessness by quietly adding to white's king safety. It's time for black to resign. These are beautiful examples, obviously. And we're about to look at a classic, the classic fossil. Okay. We're about to look at a fantastic game. Ivanchuk Anand, Linares 2009. That's crazy. Ivanchuk, man. A common situation occurs when both sides' rooks are facing off on a file, and apparently nobody will ever own it. However, occasionally an odd little bishop maneuver pops up that temporarily breaks the connection of the opposing rooks, allowing the stronger side to double or even triple behind it. Then the bishop can be moved and the prize, which is the file, is taken. Now, before going into this game, which I'm sure is going to be super instructive and beautiful, I'm going to take a little snack so that I eat something, because, you know, I'm bulking. I go to the gym during the week and I have to bulk. So I'll be back in like, I don't know, a minute. Alright, so I'm back. I'm back. I'm gonna make some moves so the screen changes a little bit, so if you're skipping, you notice it. Alright, so I have here protein bar, biological. I know that biological sounds like they taste like shit, but actually I'm quite used to these protein bars. They're actually quite tasty, so I'm happy to eat them. Protein bars, you may say, why do you eat protein bars? Did you train? Did you do something? No, I'm just studying chess. But they are tasty again. There's some proteins in it, some sugar, I guess, and it's just a quick snack, easy to make, which I don't even have to make it. So, okay. E4, bishop back, bishop d3, because there was a threat of bishop takes, pawn takes, and then e4 falls. So you needed to overprotect e4. Bishop h5 pins the knight, e5, knight d5, attacks the c3 knight, knight takes, c takes, look at the c file. It's funny how I immediately noticed the opening of the C file, whereas in the past I would have been like, you know, like, I don't even know what I would have thought. I would have thought like, oh, what if they took with the d pawn instead? Now I'm like, okay, current position, interesting. Queen e3, unpins the knight. Rook e8. If this bishop gets challenged, there is the possibility of playing bishop to f8. Knight e1. Bishop g6, bishop takes, h takes. Interesting choice, by the way, because it feels like this was white's good bishop, but on the other hand, you couldn't really avoid the trade unless you want to give up this diagonal. So bishop, knight to d3 attacks the bishop on b4, and he doesn't actually take it. I mean, he doesn't save it, which is interesting. He allows white to just trade it. b3, perhaps threatening bishop a3, rook a to c8, bishop a3 indeed, queen c3, and now rook a to c1. Interesting. Queen takes, pawn takes, f6, because of course, you know, this pawn is giving white some space, so f6. Now if you take, there is perhaps the chance of taking with the g-pawn, and black is improving his pawn structure. Or even with the knight, and then knight on e4 is really good. It would be perhaps arguably a better knight against the worse bishop. However, the pawn on e5 is under attack, so he has to do something about it. Bishop e6, sorry, bishop d6, and now a5. Okay, taking a sip of water. I'll be with you in a second, guys, but I have to make sure I check something first. I'll be with you in a second, okay? In a second. All right, so let's look at this position. Except I may have to go and do something important here. All right. Let's evaluate. Materials equal, asymmetrical pawn structure, tension in the center. We have a better bishop compared to their knight. There is an open C file, and it feels like both players are equally controlling it. It seems that a calm state of balance has been created on the C file. If either player trades rooks, the other side will recapture and get total control of the file. Thus, in these situations, the rooks usually just stare at each other, refusing to give ground. However, Ivanchuk finds a way to get past all that and claims the C file for himself. Bishop c7. Nice. Now white will play rook c3, rook c3, rook f to c1, finally move the bishop, and then the c file will be his. F takes, d takes, of course, b6, because you have to defend a5, and now rook to c3. And not rook to c2, because that would allow knight takes c5, and bishop takes fails to rook takes c2. After rook to c3, which is on a dark square, knight takes c5 no longer works, since bishop takes c5 takes the knight and protects the c3 rook at the same time. So guys, remember, every time you try to take a file with this little trick, right, of the bishop on c7 or perhaps another piece on c7, always remember to put your rook on a square where there are no tactics, because for just a second, this bishop is pinned. So you have to be very careful. Okay. Rook f8. Rook f to c1, look at that. Rook f5, which attacks the pawn, and now g4. Wow! Wow! That's crazy. Rook f7. Rook g5 leaves the rook way out of play after h3. Ah, rook takes, bishop takes, and knight takes, bishop takes. And if you take back, you lose the rook, and if you take the rook, I take with the bishop. So you cannot capture that pawn. Wow. So rook f7. Bishop d6, and black was in a bad way. Somehow Anand, who was clearly lost, managed to produce a miracle and save the game. Anand, guys, come on, Anand, look at that, that's crazy. But yeah, Anand was lost, right, thanks to this Ivanchuk's idea. But he did the miracle Anand somehow, and he drew. He drew, guys. He drew. Anand, man, that's crazy. He drew. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to say? He drew. So let's look at this in the chapter. Okay, guys, so I'm going to interrupt the video just for a second because I have to go do something super important, but I'll be back in 5 to 10 minutes. Well, for you, just a second. We are back. Waiting to pull the file, opening trigger. Jeremy Silman against Maguire, California, 1988. Okay? So we have this Jeremy Silman guy at it again. Another interesting situation occurs when a pawn capture can open up a file. In that case, if the side that can initiate the file opening pawn capture also possesses more space in that area, he can double rooks behind the pawn and only make use of the pawn trade when the resulting open file will be clearly his. Very interesting. So d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, e6. This is like the Benoni. Knight c3, takes, d6, e4, g6, f4, bishop g7, bishop b5. If I'm not mistaken, this is like absolute ultra mega main line. Knight f2, d7. I don't know about knight f2, d7, but okay. a4, castles, knight f3, knight a6, castles, knight c7, bishop back to d3, overprotecting the e4 pawn, you never know. a6, trying to go for b5 eventually. f5, knight e5, bishop to f4, queen to e7, queen to d2, knight to e8, king h1, b6, rook a to b1, queen c7, knight takes, d takes, so white has a passed pawn on d5, protected passed pawn, bishop to e3, f6, g4, consolidating f5, g5, rook f to c1, and now that the king side is closed, you focus on the queen side, knight to d6, b3, to make sure c4 is a little bit less problematic, bishop d7, queen to e2, attacks a6, and now a5. White has stopped any counterplay that black might have dreamed of on the queen side, and now he's ready to turn his attention to the other wing. h4. h6 was played, and not g takes, and now there is g5, when white gets an immediate attack, okay? So h6, king g2, preparing to bring the rooks to the h file. King f7, king f3, rook h8, rook h1, rook h to g8, and now rook to h2. This is very instructive, guys. This is instructive. What I will do is I would immediately open up things, but that's not good. Instead, what you want to do is to double, even triple, on the file before opening. White has 3 squares to use on the h file, h1, h2, h3, where black only has 2, h7 and h8. This means that white can potentially triple on the h file while black can't. This is like one of those crazy mega patterns that is like wild. I'm gonna write it down. Wait for me for a second, because I'm gonna write down this pattern. That's crazy. This is just insane. This is just insane. Okay. I'm gonna write it down. If there is a file that can be opened, look at squares behind pawns. I'm gonna actually do a diagram here. So chew, 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 chew. So 8 by 8, you like a chessboard, right? And I'm gonna put R, which is a rook. Then there is P, which is pawn. P, which is pawn. WP, WP, which is white pawn, white pawn. And then rook, rook, queen. R, rook, P, pawn, WP, white, pawn, Q, queen. behind, how do you say, tension pawns, there are 3 squares for white, 2 squares for black. Arrow, white will win control of open file. Naturally, h takes will suddenly give black as many h file squares as white has. Clearly, the key to this kind of position is to only capture on g5, which opens the h file, when white has maximized the position of his rooks and queens. That's crazy. So, okay, king g2, we already looked at this. Okay, king e7. Notice how black is trying to just run away. Run away, run away. All right. Rook b to h1, king to d8, bishop b5. Interesting. With black tied down by the h file worries, white prepares to penetrate on the opposite wing. Bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes. Look at that. Look at that. King to e7 was played. King to c8 doesn't offer any relief because b4, which is just wild, and if you play c takes b4, there are problems like bishop takes b6 and stuff. No, actually, sorry. If you play c takes b4, there's rook c1 that wins on the spot. So a takes b4, but now a5, and the whole queenside collapses. Rook c1's coming, rook a1's coming. Okay. Yeah. So king e7. Also very strong was b4 anyways, because rook c1 is still super strong, but rook c1 was played. King f7, d6. Wow. This is a wow move. This is a wow move. Suddenly white seeks to create... This is so good, bro. This is so good. Suddenly white seeks to create and dominate a completely different open file. Black's now dead, since he must either take the pawn and allow rook d2, with decisive penetration down the newly opened d file, or run from the pawn, leaving white with the monster on d6. Queen d8 was chosen. No better is queen takes d6, rook to d2. I'm noticing that usually to create these tactical things, the bishop seems to be a decent piece in order to accomplish this, but was an even quicker win for white. Yeah, because there is also rook d7 and rook d1 and queen takes b6 and bishop takes e5. Like the things here is collapsing quickly. So queen d8 was tried, that was the attempt. Now queen c4 check. Bishop takes c5, ripping open the c file, also does the job, but a player can only make one winning move at a time. Okay, so queen c4, king to f6, queen e6, talking about domination. h5, trying to create counterplay over there, but bishop takes c5 now. Boom, he played it. He played it. H takes g4 check with tempo. King g2, not interested in like playing king here, pawn here, and then tactics. So simply king g2, no worries. Bishop to h6. Bishop takes b6. If you take with the queen, I guess that rook c8 is not good, but on the other hand, what do you do? G takes h4. What? Bishop takes d8, h3. I guess he was hoping that you go to g3, but still. So king f1. Now rook to g7, bishop e7 check, and black resigned. Yeah. He's mate. He's mate. He's quite simply mate. He's just gonna be mate. Crazy. Very nice. Fischer Spassky 1992. As you know, Fischer is the GOAT. He's my absolutely favorite player, not even close. Love Fischer. I'm a fangirl when it comes to Fischer, you guys must know. So every time I see Robert James Fischer, ooh, I'm so happy. This same plan can, and often does, occur on the other wing. Okay, so e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, De Ruy Lopez. Fischer, man, so good at the game. How can you be so good at the game? Knight b8, this is all theory, believe it or not. It's a little bit weird what black is doing, but he's not. He's really not. He's just, yeah. g6, because, this knight may want to go to f5, the other knight may want to go to f5, so in general, g6. Bishop g5, h6, bishop back to d2, creating some weaknesses over to the king side. Bishop g7, a4, c5. So both white and black are like trying to fight for space and stuff. d5, so white gets some more space on the center. c4, black gets some more space on the queen side. b4, knight h7, bishop to e3, proving the position of the bishop. h5, queen to d2, rook to f8, perhaps preparing for f5 or something. And now look at that. Look at that. What's going on here is what was going on previously. There are 3 squares here for white and 2 squares for black. So Fischer does rook a3. Clearly, a takes b5, a takes b5, as we stated, gives the same amount of squares, will lead to a standoff on the a file. Bishop a7 runs into the annoying knight to b6, when a knight to c8 at some point is in the air. But, as in the previous game, why should white be in a hurry to exchange pawns and open the file? So simply rook a3. Knight d to f6. Rook e to a1. Queen to d7. And here again there is the bishop on b7, so it's opening up. Perhaps is premature, but let's see what he says. Rook 1 to a2. This is because he wants to bring a queen to the a1 square. That's why. The guy's crazy. The guy's Fischer. The guy's the goat. Even better than a takes b5, a takes b5, bishop e7. This is the idea which we also saw in Ivan Chukanand. And I think there is a Karpov game also with that idea. Usually you study that concept with a Karpov game, if I'm not crazy. I could be. Rook f to c8. But again, black doesn't have to open things in his favor. Queen c1, look at that. Bishop f8. He has to play something. Queen to a1. Setting up the legendary Aliekin's gun, a powerful form of tripling on a file where the queen places itself behind both its rooks. Okay, so queen a1, queen to e8, and now knight f1, double exclamation mark. Of course, it's Fischer. Very deep. Fischer intends to target the b5 pawn for assassination via a later knight from f1 to d2 to b1 to a3. Wow. Sorry guys, but I'm a Fischer Glazer, okay? Fischer the GOAT. The GOAT, not even questionable. Not even questionable. Okay, bishop e7, look at the way he plays. King g7, knight to b1. Like, black is Spassky. And you may say, well, he's an old Spassky. Well, Fischer's an old Fischer. Like, he plays so well. But Spassky doesn't just fall asleep, he plays knight takes e4. Now, I wonder if this is the first game of their match. I'm gonna search Fischer Spassky 1992 match on the other computer. I just want to see if this is the first game, because the first game is known to be extremely good and is one of my favorite games ever. It could be this. And you may say you don't know one of your favorite games ever. Give me a break, dude. I'm not one of those grandmasters that remember every game they see. I don't know. What the fuck? Yeah, it's this game here. Yeah, this is one of my favorite games ever, ladies and gentlemen. This is Fischer-Spassky, game 1 of the 92 match, one of my favorite games of all time. Like, knight takes e4, black decides to sacrifice a piece for counterplay rather than sit passively and die in lines like knight g8. A takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes, queen takes, bishop takes, knight to a3. Look at, like, this is so good. When b5 falls. This variation shows the point of Fischer 27th move. Like, that's why in this position he plays knight to f1 to get here. And it's crazy how simple it is. But it's simple because Fischer plays it. The rest of the game, which has nothing to do with our theme, is still extremely interesting. Yeah, it is. f5, bishop to c2. So, you know, now white's up a piece, but there is counterplay, obviously. Rook a7, bro, king f6. The knight goes back into society. Rook takes, rook a8. g4, what? H takes, rook takes, queen takes. f4, bishop takes, giving it back. E takes, knight h4, attacking g6, threatening queen d4, king e6. What? If you take with the pawn, bishop takes his mate, the goat? Like, come on, the guy was old and he's playing like this. Like, these are two old men playing. What are you talking about? This is such a good game. Bishop f8, and you have to see these moves like in advance, of course. Bishop f8, queen takes f4. Wow. King d7, knight d4. So let's do a quick evaluation. Material is actually equal, and black has the bishop pair, but black's king is a little bit exposed. Queen e1, king g2, bishop to d5, bishop e4, bishop takes, knight takes. The b5 pawn is hanging. Bishop e7, knight takes b5, there's no real way to defend it. King c6 is illegal, so. Knight back, knight takes, knight e6, queen to e5, threatening all sort of discoveries, and then the queen falls, and Spassky resigned. That's just crazy. That's just so beautiful, man. This game is just, this game, man. This game. What a game. What a game. I'm so happy I got to see it again. So good. Fischer-Spassky 1992 game 1. Control of the 7 or 8 rank. So this is a puzzle. But we are not in the puzzle section. But this is a puzzle. So let's try to solve it. So the importance of open, half-open files, creating them, fighting to dominate them, penetrating into the enemy position on them, and using them to pressure weak enemy pawns should be clear by now. But equally important is the enormous power of a rook on the 7th or 8th rank. 8th rank incursions are usually of a tactical or attacking nature, and back rank mates are a part of every beginner's tactical training. Black appears to be okay, since his pieces are all defended, and he's even created Luft by h7, h6. That stops all those nasty back rank mates, doesn't it? I think I already know the solution, but let's evaluate. So so material is equal, and it seems like all the pieces are even slightly well placed. Let's look if there are any threats, though. For black, it seems like there aren't, but let's see for us. Are there any like quick moves, like checks, captures, and attacks? Well, there would be this check, queen takes f8, right? If they move, we are comfortably up a rook and we win the game. So queen takes, king takes, rook to d8 is checkmate. So this is the solution. Okay, so let's click on it. Queen takes f8. After this, black has to resign. King h7 leaves him a whole rook down, which we analyzed. King takes f8, rook d8 is both sudden and brutal. Yeah, very nice. Let's solve this one here. Our next example addresses another important bank rank idea. Okay, let's evaluate this position. Chew 1. So material is equal. However, there are some tactical nuances here. Like our king is slightly safe because there are no checks for them. Like rook c1, bishop takes c1, queen f1, king takes f1, queen f2, bishop takes f2. So there is that. Bishop takes e5 is not a threat, I think. Okay, so what else? What else? Do we have like threats ourselves? Rook d8, for example. Rook d8, there is bishop f8, okay? And then we may have bishop h6 though. Bishop h6. And in that position it's important to evaluate if they have some checks. Rook c1 fails to bishop takes c1. Queen f2, there is queen takes f2. And after rook c1, queen f1, rook takes f1, king takes f1, the problem remains. So I think rook check and bishop h6 is very good. And I think I'm going to play it. Hopefully I'm not blundering the whole game away, but... Perfect. This was very tactical. And again, it's nice with this way of doing the Armageddon thinking. I like how the tactical position... No, this is actually great, guys. Guys, wait a minute, because this is huge. Again, I'm talking about the ladder of which I used to evaluate, which is material, pawn structure, open files, weak squares, minor pieces, and then Armageddon thinking. Checks, threats, and all these things. Before anything else. So, that was obviously a very tactical position, but you have to systemize it in a way. And I've done it. So that's great. Okay, so, let's look at this game very quickly. So this was a Sicilian... a dragon, yeah. Yeah, this is classic dragon. Yeah, if you take the pawn on e4, queen takes wins. So bishop e6, push, f4. So yeah, white got a little bit of an advantage in the opening, perhaps. Look at that. Yeah. Knowledge of these bank rank patterns can lead to some nice creative achievements. Our next game is a good example of this. Okay. So now we are going through a game, Pelikan George against Skalika Karel, played in Prague, 1939. Knowledge of these bank rank patterns can lead to some nice creative achievement. Our next game is a good example. Okay. So d4 knight f6. So as you can see, this is a completely different opening. I don't know what black is doing, but I guess he's doing something. White's taking some space, but at the same time his light square bishop perhaps not super active. Castle on g2. g4, now the bishop has to take. Now there is an attack on b2, rather than addressing it, white allows white to take with check, but I guess after rook c1 is not that problem. g6, rook to f2 defends the pawn. Black strikes in the center, c takes, pawn takes, knight takes, rook takes. Black's behind in development, and his king suffers from some weakened dark squares. White makes immediate use of these things. So if we evaluate the position, chew 3, material is equal. There is an immediate threat, which is rook takes d1. Do we have checks? Rook c8, rook c8, queen takes c8, queen takes d5. We can notice that. Rook check, king to g7. There's perhaps queen c1. I don't know. So check. The bank rank turns out to be vulnerable. Bishop f8. A scary move to play. It instantly brings to mind this pattern, which is bishop h6. But black didn't like the look of queen takes c8, probably the best try, but queen takes d5 attacks the rook in the corner, so knight d7, rook to d2 attacks the knight, knight to b6 attacks the queen, queen takes e5, so white wins a pawn with a solid extra pawn. Okay. After rook c8, there is also king g7, queen to c1, here we go, is immediately decisive. Here there are some crazy threats. For example, if knight d7, there's bishop check, king f6, knight e4, only move king e6, rook c6, bishop d6, queen c4, threatening rook takes d6 because the rook would be pinned, is a total nightmare. Now, after queen c1, there is f6, rook c7, brutal, queen b4 defends the bishop, rook to d2, rook takes, bishop takes, only move, I think, knight here, queen e6, rook takes e7, we do not scare easy, queen takes e7, bishop h6, king f7, check, king e8, check, king d7, bishop to f8, and black lifespan is nearing its end. Okay, very tactical situations, of course. So bishop f8, and now queen takes d5. Wow. Now if you take the white rook, I take your rook, and I merge up a rook, so you have to take here. And now rook to d2. Queen b7 was played. Queen a5, take us into familiar territory. Bishop h6, knight to d7, rook takes a8, queen c7, rook takes d7, mate. Yeah. There are some tactical nuances. If you play bishop here immediately, they can just develop their knight. And if rook takes, queen takes, so you couldn't do that. So queen b7, rook d to d8, knight to d7, rook takes a8, obviously, king g7, and now b3 to save the pawn. And black is down material and under tremendous pressure. The end could have been pleasant for the second player. The end couldn't have been pleasant. Okay. Queen c7, knight to e4, queen c2, bishop to f2, queen c7, g5, knight to b6 attacks the rook, bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes. Now there are some threats like knight f6, rook g8. Actually, rook g8 mate is threatened immediately. Check. King g3, f5, rook g8, check, rook e8, 1-0. 1-0. It's just over. It's very over. It's either you move the king here and you lose the queen, or you move it back and you get mated. Like if you go back, check here, you can move the knight, you can do many things. Okay. So that was a nice, cute game, I guess. The windmill. Ooh, this is this is terrible. As we have seen, a rook on the 8th rank can lead to all sorts of fun. However, control of the 7th rank is particularly prized because it not only annoys the enemy king, but also targets all the enemy pawns that sit on that rank. Black is a piece ahead. Not for long, but a series of discovered checks, this kind of position is known as a windmill, will divest him of most of his army. The point of this extreme example is to highlight the power of the rook on the 7th rank, and also how many black goodies are sitting there waiting to be eaten. So I guess we can take here. I guess we can check again. I guess we can take here, check again, take here, check again, take here, and I guess we can take here. So, forcing the king back to h8 and thus reloading for another decisive check, another discovered check. Well, it's also decisive, I guess. Enough checks, it's time for one final meal. Rook takes a8. Okay, that seemed more fantasy than reality, but a rook on the 7th often wields serious powers, as shown in our next game. Silman against Reassess, San Francisco, 1983. So Silman is elite again. The man, the myth, the legend, at it again. So, at it again. At it again. D takes, knight takes, queen takes, bishop f6, rook to d2. c6 attacks the queen, queen moves. Rook fd8, rook ad1, c takes, knight takes. Frightening knight b5 perhaps. Knight e5 attacks the queen, queen moves. Knight c6 back, queen takes c7. Rook takes. Grandmaster Reassess was a fantastic defensive player, so one can understand why he thought he'd be able to hold this quiet endgame. However, his positions turns out to be far worse than he imagined. So he's playing a Grandmaster. No joke. Knight to b5. Look at that. Attacks the rook and the other rook. So rook takes d2. Now, if you play rook c to c8, bishop takes happens. And after g takes, rook takes, knight takes. Because if you play rook takes, knight takes a7, that's the little trick, leaves white a solid pawn ahead. But after knight d8, rook d7, and white takes the control of the file. Both these and knight takes a7 are winning. Bishop c6, for example, rook takes, bishop takes, c takes. And a4, a5, and you win the endgame. Rook c1 is not made because of bishop f1. Okay, so rook takes d2 was played, rook takes d2, now the rook's hanging, so rook back, and you're about to play rook d8. Rook e7 loses material to both knight takes a7, taking advantage of black's weakened back rank, and bishop a3, which attacks the rook. The rook goes back, rook d7, and you're just crashing. So rook c8 was played. Now bishop takes, g takes, rook d7. Suddenly black is completely lost. The rook on the 7th rank, which eyes a7, b7, and f7, combined with my queenside majority, superior kingside structure, and active minor pieces, will prove to be far more than he can handle. So rook to b8, trying to defend the guy. And here f4. What the hell? What is this move? Denying black's knight access to e5. This Silman dude is good at the game. a6, knight d6, attacking the bishop. Knight d4, if you take my bishop, I take your bishop. Bishop h5, attacking also f7. Bishop c6, rook c7, attacking f7 again. Rook d8, knight to c8. We saw those knight jumps, right? Remember, in the tactical section? I mean, not tactical section, but like knight section. Knight e7 is threatened, which wins the bishop on c6. So bishop e4, and now knight takes b6. And now there is the c4 passed pawn. Bishop b1 was played, trying to counterattack on those pawns. The position after bishop g6, bishop takes h6, rook d7, rook takes, knight takes, is an easy win for white, thanks to his 3-1 queenside pawn majority. And after rook d7, if you play rook b8, saying you take one knight, I take the other one, is still winning for is also winning for white. So after knight takes b6, instead of bishop g6, bishop b1 was played, but now bishop takes f7, king f8, bishop h5, with the idea of rook f7 perhaps even. With the removal of the f7 pawn, white's rook now reigns supreme over the whole 7 rank. And there is also, on bishop takes a2, there is also rook takes h7 if they want. King to g8, and now knight d7 with the idea knight takes f6, king h8, rook takes h7 mate. So bishop back to b1 to defend h7, but the check comes anyways. King h8, king to f2, bringing the king forward. knight takes b3, and now g4. Perhaps with the idea f5, and then black cannot stop rook takes h7, intending f4, f5, blocking out the black bishop defense of h7 and forcing mate via rook takes h7, exactly. So check, king g3, king e1 is even stronger, but okay, king g3, knight to c5 to deliver some checks, f5, check, knight takes, bishop takes, but now there is a winning endgame. Rook g2, king here, bishop to c6, rook to c7, bishop to a4. If you go to e8, I just take it. So now there is e7, check, rook to... What? What's that? What? He promoted to a rook. Okay. Why not rook e2? I don't know. I guess if rook e2 you can promote and then play rook c8 and you will win a piece, but weird. Anyways, this was a nice game. Clean. Silman cleaned. Now, Georg Marco against Jax Miesis, Monte Carlo 1903. So this is an OG game. As nice as a rook on the 7th rank might be, 2 rooks on the 7th, known as pigs on the 7th, are even better. This creates various material winning scenarios and also sets up many potential mates. So e4, c5, knight f3, e6. So this is a game of chess. Takes, rook e2, as you can see the control for the e file is beginning a little bit, fighting for the f5 square perhaps. Now attacking the knight moves, bishop takes, never mind about the f5 square. But let me introduce myself to the 7th rank. d4, threatening f3, the queen is opened up, every move makes something happen. King g2, g5, queen d3, threatening mate on h7, f5, queen takes, threatening mate again, queen g6, takes, rook d to c8, rook e2, rook c3, a4, rook c4, a5, a6, king to g3, rook to d8, b5, pawn takes, rook takes, d3, c takes, rook takes, d3. White is 2 pawns up and should win easily. The point of this example is that it demonstrates in very simple fashion just what a pair of pigs can do. Rook b7. There is a threat now of rook e8 mate, which forces black into a defensive posture. Rook c8, rook e2 e7, brutal. The pigs join up on the 7th and prepares to dish out some pain. White could have played a6, but he probably wanted to avoid the complications resulting from rook to f8. Of course, that wouldn't have given black more than a momentary rush. Rook to a2, check, go back, a7, and it's over. But still, after rook e2 e7, if you play rook to f8, then you only leave the king 2 squares, and so rook h7, king to g8, rook to g7 is mate. So this move prevents rook f8. Rook a3, check, not falling for king to e8, rook to b7, when the threat of rook h8 mate can only be avoided for a few I'll give everything away and then get mated anyways moves. Yeah. So king to g8, rook check, king to f8, and rook takes g6. Threatening also to win the rook on c8. Rook c to c3. More natural is rook takes a5, but then check. And rook takes g5 leads to a rook endgame where white enjoys a 3-pawn advantage. That's so good. Very nice move. Rook takes g5. Rook c to c3. Check. King g8. Rook a7 defends both pawns and is up 3 pawns. So, you tell me. rook c2, rook to d6, threatening mate on d8, rook to c8 forced, rook d to d7, rook e8, rook g7, king h8. A different kind of mate will seen after king f8, rook a to f7, so king h8 is forced, check, check, and now rook takes g5. And black resigned because now white is up 4 pawns. This is a very, very nice endgame. I love rooks. I love rooks. I don't know what to tell you. I really love rooks. W. Brownie against Jeremy Silman, Koltanovsky International 1999. So our hero Jeremy Silman is at it again. Bro, I'm having so much fun. We're looking at all these games and all these things. Like, are you guys enjoying it? Because I'm enjoying it a lot. So, the pigs on the 7th rank can also serve defensively, giving their owners enough counterplay to hold a position that might otherwise be problematic. So d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6. This is some mainline Slav or something. I don't really know what's going on, but we saw some similar positions previously, I think. What happened here? Sorry. Take, knight attacks the bishop, takes, defends the bishop, knight takes queen takes b4. What if you take on c6? I guess rook f to c8 or something gives a lot of counterplay. Oh, no, e4 falls, never mind. So queen takes, rook takes, attacking e4, f3, now c5, attacks that pawn, takes, so material is equal, but rook c8, bishop takes, okay, so black is down a pawn, but rook c2, c2, and g2 is lost. King h1, rook takes g2, threatening rook takes a2, bishop to g1. Black has 2 rooks on the 7th rank, but their effectiveness seems to be blunted by the bishop on g1. If black can't get something going, he'll lose to white's obvious plan of a4, a5, a6, a7, etc. Fortunately, the rooks don't need to work alone, and reinforcements are on the way. Knight h5, look at that. Look at that. a5, knight g3 check, that's some wild shenanigans. Simplest is rook g5, a6, because on bishop to e3, rook to g2 doesn't get white anywhere, since a6 loses to rook takes, king takes, check, check, king e1, checkmate. So you would have to play bishop to g1 and rook to g5 repeats the position. The simplest is rook g5, a6, now knight g3, and now check, bishop h2, check, and is a draw. This is a draw. So knight g3 check, pawn takes, rook takes, threatening rook h3. Black is a piece down and is also facing death by a pawn, but his control of the 7th rank and the enemy king's news comfort is so complete that he'll easily hold the draw. Bishop c5, rook h3, rook g3, check, king e1, rook h3, threatening mate, bishop g1, attacks the bishop, threatening mate. The final point, black saw back on the 26th move that he couldn't play rook f3 because of rook d2, rook takes d2, king takes d2, rook check, king c3 when the a pawn is supreme. So rook h3, bishop back to g1, now king f1 allows rook f3 because rook d2 fails to rook takes, okay? And maybe still a draw, but I'm not sure. Maybe not, because then, okay. And this is a draw by repetition. All this shouldn't give the impression that a rook on the 7th rank or 8th rank is always advantageous. The following examples should put this in perspectives. So, let's keep going. Before keep going, let's see what's the moment here is. Symbolic control, another couple of games, and then there is the summary. So we are about to reach the tests. Let's go. So symbolic control number 1. White has, okay, let's evaluate very quickly. 3, 3, 6, 4, 2, 6. Okay, so this material is equal. White has a rook on the 7th rank, but who cares? There aren't any targets on the 7th rank, on that rank, and black's king isn't bothered in the least by white's empty 7th rank acquisition. Though white has the move, he is quite lost. White's pawns on a4 and c4 are ripe and ready for the taking. Thus, control of the 7th and 8th rank is symbolic of what a rook might accomplish there. If it's not able to do its stuff, then don't bother moving there in the first place. Yeah, because usually, since the player starts with all the pawns on the 7th and the 2nd rank, the 7th or 2nd rank are critical, but not necessarily. So symbolic control part 2, white controls the open file, so he has all the chances in this position. After all the hoopla about the 7th rank, we simply have to ask if white should make the leap into d7. If black's rook stood on e8 instead of f8, then rook d7 would be very strong. But in our actual position, the grab for 7th is misguided since it can be easily challenged. King f3. On rook d7, there's rook f7, and on the check you just go back, and white's not accomplishing anything at all. Since the 7th rank just isn't to be had, white would be well advised to show patience and improve the position of his king with king f3. So, a couple of games more. Marozzi against Byrne, Ostend 1905. Let's see this game. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, the usual, the rule of F. There are some crazy tactics here, but not that crazy. Okay, attacks the bishop. Bishop a3. White owns the open d file. His rook is proudly sitting on the 7th rank, where it attacks b7, and his position seems to be devoid of any weaknesses. Shouldn't white be significantly better here? The answer is rather surprising. White doesn't have more than a small plus. In fact, Marozzi, a magnificent endgame player, wasn't even able to dent black's shell. Bishop f8. An important move that strives to remove the defender of the b2 pawn. c4, rook to b6, c5. A draw also results from bishop takes, king takes, threatening b2, b3, a5, rook a to d1. On rook to e1, threatening to double on the 7th, is defended by rook to e8. And after rook a to d1, there is a4, rook to d3, takes, rook to a6, rook takes b7, rook takes b7, rook takes b7, rook to a4, c5, rook a5, a4, king e8, rook c7, rook takes, rook a7, rook c2, which puts the rook on the 7th in a way. So c5, is this the line that I just saw? Yes. So c5 was played in the game. Rook to b5 attacks the pawn. Rook d1. Far more interesting is rook to e1. When one can spend many hours delving into the position's hidden treasures. Though an analysis of such an endgame, which often features both sides fighting to get pigs on the 7th, is way outside this book's scope, I recommend that endgame enthusiasts focus on lines such as b6, rook b8, bishop takes c5, h5, what? So for example, b6, c takes, bishop takes, b takes, rook e2, e7, even though g3 is much tougher and leads to many intricate variations. And now one simple but fun possibility is rook b1 check, king e2, check, king e3, rook takes, this is crazy. Rook f8 is of course simpler, but rook takes a2 just for the fun of it. Rook takes f7, rook e8. When king f3 is met by rook f8, king f3, rook f8, and that's spinned. King d3 instead is met by rook d8. Look at that, that's crazy. Rook f8, I recall a story about a famous grandmaster that wanted to learn the complete truth about a certain endgame position. He got some friends together and they all hunkered down in the grandmaster's apartment for several days, never leaving or seeing the light of day, and living on a diet of pizza, earthworms, and dried paint chips. This seems amazing. This sounds so amazing. Their ordeal only ended when the position had been completely deconstructed, rebuilt, and mastered. Doing a deep analysis, alone or with friends, of any complex position is not only highly enjoyable, but also extremely instructive, though I recommend stocking up on real food and avoiding the earthworms and paint chips. Aww. If you have a chess teacher, then all the better. You can turn over your analysis to the chess pro and see how close to reality you were, and then have him shown you the things you did wrong and help you fix those weak points. Of course, most people can't afford the time for a 7-day adult slumber chess party. Imagine your wife pounding on the door screaming, "Harold, Harold, what about your job, Harold? What are you doing in there?" Crazy. Don't despair. Analyze the position of interest over a several-week period, giving it an hour here and an hour there. You'll find that the time was well spent. Okay, let's keep going with the book though, because I'm grinding this book. That's what I'm doing at the moment. At a moment notice. I have to monitor also the other monitor. Yo-ho-ho. So rook b5, rook a to d1, rook e8, this was the game, rook d8. It's as if white was saying, I'm not doing much on the 7th rank, so let's try d8. Rook takes king g7, threatening c5. Wisely stepping off the bank rank, the d8 rook is almost fully nullified. b4, bishop to e7. And this move, which takes the terror away from checks along the a1 h8 diagonal, like check here, leaves white with absolutely nothing. The rest of the game wasn't even interesting. Wasn't very interesting. Bishop here, a4. Takes, king here, h4, b6, c takes, rook here, check, check, king here, f6, rook e4. And this was a draw. Okay. Very nice, Marcello, that was very nice, you know. Do you know that was very nice? Okay, Alexander Delchev against Hikaru Nakamura, Mulhouse 2009. Finally, we'll end our theoretical musings on rooks and the 7th and 8th ranks by offering up this amusing little game. So e4, d6, d4, g6. Hikaru, as usual, with his interesting openings, let's say. Let's just leave it at that. 97, e5, c5, bishop e4, queen c8. I don't know what's going on. d takes, queen d5. If queen takes, knight takes, you're threatening knight c7, so rook to c8. Knight here, interesting move. Knight takes, pawn takes. Knight f6, prioritizing development. I guess if pawn takes, bishop takes, then you're threatening b7. So knight f6, long castle. Knight g4 attacks the bishop, b7, wild. Rook d8, bishop b6. If you take the pawn, rook d8 is mate. So f6 was played. Rook check. If you take with the rook, I take with the bishop. If you take the bishop, I promote. So king f7, rook to d7, defends the pawn and eyes e7. Rook on the 7th. Bishop to h6 attacks the pawn, pins the pawn, which is already attacked. Wait a minute, guys, that I have to do something important here. I have to keep monitoring something on the other screen, which is very, very important. So g3 takes, king b1, knight e5 takes, bishop to a7, king to e6, rook to d1, f3, rook c7, threatening rook d7, e4, rook d to d7, rook h to e8, a3, creating some luft. Noticing how the black pawns cannot really be pushed forward because the dark square bishop, even though you can play e3, I guess. Bishop g5, h4. White has been trying to cause havoc on his 7th rank, while also doing his best to make inroads into the 8th so that his b-pawn can promote. On the other hand, black has held fast and has also begun his own bid to raise the e4 and b pawns to his 8th rank and promote them. Well, I see the e and f pawn, perhaps there is a typo here. The goals are clear, though achieving them is going to be based on pure tactics. This example is raw entertainment, with the rub that it helps solidify the understanding that getting one's heavy pieces and pawns, since if they get to the 8th, they turn into heavy pieces, to those ranks is serious business. Okay, so e3 was played, finally, here we go. Since black's goal is to get his pawns to the 8th rank, why waste a critical tempo moving the bishop? In fact, in positions of this nature, time, rushing towards your goal with as much speed as possible, is often more important than material. Here's an example of the difference one single tempo makes. Bishop h6 is a blunder. Seems logical, but it gives white a critical tempo, which he uses to get his king off the back rank. King to a2, e3 now, but now rook takes e7. Bishop b8 would be an inaccuracy, because king g4 leads to a completely insane position. A possible continuation is rook takes h7, e2, rook e7, f2, that's just crazy. Rook takes, promotion, rook e6, queen here pins, rook here, king takes, king b1, king takes, rook takes g6, with continuing strangeness in store. This is a major candidate for Larsen's famous long analysis, wrong analysis. I'm sure improvements are lurking behind every corner, so happy hunting. Now, rook takes e7, bishop takes, here, king here, bishop d6 check. What? With a probable draw, yeah. Okay, crazy analysis, guys, crazy analysis. We are here trying to understand strategy, you know, so let's just enjoy this. Bishop takes, f2, this is the actual game. White is dead lost because black has won the pawn race to the 8th rank. F1 equals queen, it's a girl! Silman is wild. It's a girl, that's crazy, So funny, it's so funny. E2. A pity, since a truly extraordinary situation would have arisen after... Oh, he resigned. It's a pity because e2, b8 queens, twins. It's a girl. Twins. This guy is crazy. Okay, I mean, I say it in a positive way, but he's crazy. Each side has claimed an advanced rank. You don't see this every day. White has doubled his rooks on his 7th, while black has doubled his queens on the 8th. Yeah, the queens appear to have a bit more punch. Oh, really? So, and they're only newborns, anyways. So let's look at the summary here. If you want your rooks to be effective, they need an open file. Without an open file, a bishop or knight might easily outperform the rook, leaving it sitting passively behind its pawns, while it sadly dreams of unrealized potential. A half-open file is often used to exert tremendous pressure against weak enemy pawns. A file is a very... Sorry, I have to reread this. A half-open file is often used to exert tremendous pressure against weak enemy pawns, okay? A file is a very valuable commodity because it's the road that your rook travels on in order to penetrate into the enemy position. That's why such files are often fought over, with both sides trying hard to make it their own. The importance of open, half-open files, creating them, fighting to dominate them, penetrating into the enemy position on them, and using them to pressure weak enemy pawns, should be clear by now. But equally important is the enormous power of a rook on the 7th or 8th rank. 8th rank incursions are usually of a tactical or attacking nature, and back rank mates are part of every beginner's tactical training. A rook on the 8th rank can lead to all sorts of fun. However, control of the 7th rank is particularly prized because it not only annoys the enemy king, but also targets all the enemy pawns that have yet to venture forward. So that was nice, very nice. Now, rook tests. We're finally here. The humble rook, also known in some American clubs as an ox, is the master of files and ranks. But do you fully understand your rook ABCs? These tests will give you an excellent idea about the highs and lows of your rook IQ. If you have trouble solving the tests, don't worry. That means we have uncovered something you don't understand. And this allows you to fix things by rereading the previous material or by picking up the bits of knowledge you're missing in the answers that start after the exercise. I'm usually terrible at these puzzles, but... Okay, now, before going into the puzzle, guys, I will close the video here, believe it or not, because this video has already been like almost 2 hours. And I will see you in the next episode, which is how to reassess your chess, episode 12. And I think I'm going to have the webcam for that episode. And I'll see you then for the attempt at solving those rook puzzles. And once we are done with the rook puzzles, we will go into part 4, which is material fear of giving up or taking material, which is finally talking about some chess psychology. But again, it's not psychology in the wishy-washy sense, but it's like a thinking process and cognitive bias type of thing. So it's going to be extremely useful for our improvement. Thanks so much for watching. Enjoy your chess.